My husband of 39 years handed me a folder across the breakfast table on a Tuesday morning in October, and the first thing I noticed was that his coffee was still untouched. He'd made it, set it down, and never taken a single sip. That's when I knew whatever was inside that folder had been planned for a long time. "I want a divorce, Lorraine," he said. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm keeping the house, the RRSPs, the investment account. You'll get the car and a monthly allowance." He said it the way he used to read aloud from assembly instructions. Flat. Certain. Already done. I was 66 years old. We had built that house in Oakville together. I had never missed a single mortgage payment, never let the property tax lapse, never once forgotten to renew the home insurance. And yet, sitting there in my own kitchen with my own husband, I suddenly felt like a tenant who'd just been served notice. I didn't cry. I don't know why. Maybe I was too tired for it. I just looked at him and said, "Let me think about it, Arthur." He nodded like that was reasonable, like he was doing me a favor. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after he'd gone to bed. I opened the folder. The settlement he'd had drawn up gave him the house, valued at just over $800,000, the joint RRSP accounts we'd been contributing to for nearly 4 decades, and the investment portfolio his firm managed. I would receive our second car, which was 11 years old and needed new brakes, and $3,000 a month in spousal support. For 2 years. After that, nothing. 39 years. 2 children. His mother's last years of her life, which I had managed almost entirely on my own while he was at conference after conference. My own teaching career, which I had walked away from when we moved from Hamilton to follow his promotion. Reduced to a Ford Escape with worn brake pads and a 2-year countdown. I'm going to be honest with you. The fear that came over me that night was unlike anything I had ever felt. Not even labor. Not even the time our son broke his arm at 9 years old and we couldn't reach anyone for 2 hours. This was the kind of fear that comes when the ground itself stops feeling solid. I was 66 years old and I had no independent income, no pension in my own name, and apparently no claim to the home I had cleaned and maintained and loved for 22 years. I gave myself until midnight to fall apart. Then I made a cup of tea and I started thinking. The next morning, I called my daughter. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear my grandchildren in the background. "Mum?" Just the way she said it, I could tell she already heard something in my voice. "Your father wants a divorce," I said. Silence. Then, "Mum, no." "Yes." "Oh, God. Mum, when?" "He told me yesterday. He already has a lawyer. He wants the house, the RRSPs, everything." She said something under her breath I won't repeat here. Then she said, "Don't sign anything. Don't sign a single page." I hadn't planned to, but hearing her say it out loud, firmly, like she was putting a wall up between me and that folder, it helped. "I need a recommendation," I told her. "Not a divorce lawyer. Not yet. Someone who looks at money. Financial investigations." She went quiet for a moment. "What are you thinking, Mum?" I was thinking about the last 4 years. The way Arthur had started taking calls in the garage. The way he'd switched to a separate credit card for what he called business expenses. The way a man who used to go over every line of our monthly statements with me had slowly, quietly, stopped involving me in anything financial at all. "I'm thinking," I said, "that your father is in a hurry for a reason." She called me back within the hour with a name. A forensic accountant in Burlington, a woman named Sylvia Beaumont, who had helped a colleague of my daughter's during a business dispute that turned out to involve hidden assets. "She's thorough," my daughter said, "and she doesn't miss much. I used money from my own checking account, the one Arthur had let me keep for household expenses, grocery runs, the grandchildren's birthday gifts, to pay for the first consultation. $350. I remember thinking this is either the best money I've ever spent or it means nothing. Sylvia's office was on the 2nd floor of a building near the GO station. She shook my hand, poured me a glass of water without being asked, and said, "Tell me everything and don't decide what's relevant before you say it. Let me decide." So I told her. The late calls. The separate card. The way he'd shifted our joint investments to a simplified management structure 2 years ago, which I had signed off on without fully understanding because he presented it to me while I was helping our grandson with a school project, and I was distracted, and I trusted him. I'd trusted him for 39 years. When I mentioned I still had access to the household account and could see some of the transfers when money moved, Sylvia leaned forward. "Do you have any statements? Paper or digital?" "I have 2 years of statements I printed off when he wasn't home." She looked at me differently after that. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "I think you may have been paying closer attention than your husband realized." I had been, not because I suspected him, not for most of those years, but because I had always been the one who made sure things didn't fall through the cracks. I was the one who remembered when the property tax was due, when the TFSA contribution room reset, when the RRSPs needed to be reviewed. Arthur was brilliant at earning money. I was the one who made sure we kept it. And now I was starting to see that someone else had been making sure it went somewhere else. Over the next 10 days, I did something I never imagined I would do in my own home. I photographed every document I could access in Arthur's home office, bank statements I found in the filing cabinet I technically shared with him, printed emails he'd left in a recycling tray, a business registration document I didn't recognize. I created an email account he had no knowledge of and forwarded everything to Sylvia. I felt like a stranger in my own life. Sneaking down the hall at 11 at night, phone in hand, heart going too fast. But the alternative was walking out of a 39-year marriage with a used car and 24 months of support, and I wasn't ready to do that, not without knowing the truth. Arthur noticed something had shifted. I could see it in the way he watched me at dinner. I was polite. I was pleasant. I asked about his day. I gave him nothing. "Have you had a chance to look at the papers?" he asked one evening. "I'm still reviewing my options," I said. His jaw tightened, just lightly. "Lorraine, I've been more than fair." "Have you?" It came out before I could stop it. He looked at me for a long moment. "What does that mean?" "Nothing. I'm just being thorough." But I could see it, a flicker of something behind his eyes. Not guilt, exactly. Calculation. He was wondering what I knew. Good, I thought. Let him wonder. Sylvia called 12 days later. "I need you to come in," she said. "Can you come tomorrow?" I was there at 9 in the morning. She had printed documents laid across her desk in a way that told me she had been at this for hours before I arrived. "Do you know anyone named Harwood Capital Solutions?" she asked. I shook my head. "It's a numbered company registered in Ontario about 3 years ago. Your husband is the sole director." She pushed a document across to me. "According to what I've been able to trace, Harwood Capital has been receiving consulting fee payments from clients of your husband's firm. Clients he manages directly, routed through a third-party billing arrangement. The fees go to Harwood. Harwood is Arthur." I stared at the paper. "Is that? It could constitute a conflict of interest at best, and fraud at worst, depending on whether his firm knows about it. But there's more." She pointed to a second document. "Over the past 3 years, approximately $160,000 in marital assets has been moved out of your joint accounts into accounts connected to Harwood. He's been building a parallel financial life, Mrs. Calloway, and he timed this divorce for after he'd moved enough out that the remaining joint assets look much smaller than they actually are." I felt the kitchen table from that Tuesday morning all over again. The untouched coffee, the folder. "He's been planning this," I said, "for at least 3 years, possibly longer. Can we prove it? We can document it. But I want to be clear with you." Sylvia looked at me steadily. "If we take this to the surface, we're not just talking about family court. Depending on the nature of those consulting arrangements and whether his firm was deceived, this could involve regulatory bodies, possibly the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit." I thought about Arthur at 68, with his tidy hair and his good suits and his firm's name on the door. I thought about 39 years. "Yes," I said. "Let's prove it." I drove home and kept my face perfectly calm through dinner. That night, he found me in the living room, the settlement folder on the coffee table. "You've made a decision?" he asked. "I have a question first," I said. "About Harwood Capital Solutions." The color left his face so quickly it was almost like watching a light switch off. He stopped. "That's a small business matter. Nothing to do with us." "Isn't it? Because it seems like quite a lot of our money has found its way there over the past few years." He took a step into the room. When he spoke again, his voice had gone very quiet. "Lorraine, be careful. You don't understand what you're looking at." "I understand exactly what I'm looking at," I said. "I've been understanding our finances for 39 years. You just forgot that." His expression changed. The reasonable, patient husband face dissolved, and what was underneath it was something colder. "You've been going through my private files." "Our files," I said. "We're still married." "Ontario is an equalization province, Arthur. I'd speak to your lawyer about that." He left the room without another word. I heard him in the office, on the phone, voice low and urgent. I went to bed at 10 o'clock, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. The next morning, I filed my own divorce application. Not under his terms. I had retained a lawyer by then, a woman in Mississauga named Christine, who had 20 years of experience in high-asset family law, and an expression that suggested she had seen every version of this story and was not remotely impressed by any of them. When Arthur's counsel received my filing and the accompanying notice that I had documented concerns about hidden marital assets, Christine told me his team called within the hour. I was also on the phone with Sylvia, filing formal complaints with both Arthur's firm and the Ontario Securities Commission regarding the Harwood Capital arrangements. Arthur came home that evening like a storm front moving through. He didn't call out when he came in, just stood in the kitchen doorway with his coat still on. "You had no right," he said. "I had every right. I was making soup. I didn't stop stirring. I had the right when you started moving our money without telling me. I had the right when you had divorce papers drawn up while I thought we were still a partnership. You're going to destroy everything." His voice cracked on the last word. "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "You did. 3 years ago, when you opened a numbered company with our money and started planning your exit. Lorraine, the accounts are frozen, Arthur. Christine filed this afternoon. If you need to discuss arrangements, contact her." He stood there a moment longer. Then he walked back down the hall, and I heard the front door close. That night, my daughter came with her husband, and they sat with me at the kitchen table, and I told them everything. Her husband, who works in banking and understands these documents better than I ever could, went pale reading what Sylvia had compiled. "Mom," my daughter said, "this is serious." "I know. He could face regulatory action." "I know that too." Her husband looked up. "You have a very strong case." The equalization calculation alone, once the hidden assets are included, Mom, the numbers change significantly. "I'm going to call Christine tonight," my daughter said. "Let her rest," her husband said. "She looks like she finally actually rested." He was right. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the floor shaking underneath me. The weeks that followed were not simple. Arthur's lawyer sent letters. He called from a number I didn't recognize twice, and I forwarded both voicemails to Christine without listening to the end of either. He had moved into what I understood was a short-term furnished rental in Burlington. Then one afternoon, as I was raking leaves in the backyard, my phone rang. A smooth, practiced voice introduced herself as Arthur's lead counsel, a woman named Pearson, calling informally, lawyer to lawyer, well, woman to woman. She said Arthur was prepared to revise his offer significantly. "The house," she said. "He'd let me keep the house. A generous monthly support figure. All I needed to do was withdraw the complaints to the OSC and his firm and sign a revised agreement." I stood in my backyard with a rake in my hand and felt the pull of it. The simplicity, the end to phone calls and legal fees, and the particular exhaustion of being in conflict with someone you once loved. Then I called Christine. "They're scared," she said, when I relayed the conversation. "His firm has suspended him pending the internal investigation. This offer is about limiting his exposure, not about being fair to you." "What happens if I say no?" "It gets harder before it gets better." "But Lorraine, you have documentation that changes the entire equalization calculation. You're not looking at what he offered you originally. You're looking at something entirely different. I said no. Pearson called back. I said no again. My son drove from Ottawa that weekend. He showed up at the door with 2 bags of groceries and a look on his face that I recognized from when he was about 14 and had decided something was wrong and was determined to fix it. You should have called me sooner, he said. I know. Dad really did this. He really did. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Okay, what do you need? We talked for 3 hours that night, my son and I. He's an engineer, not a lawyer, but he has a methodical mind, and he went through everything Sylvia had documented with the same focus he brings to a project spec. This is solid, he kept saying. This is really solid, Mum. Having him there didn't change the legal reality, but it changed something in me. The loneliness of the previous months lifted enough that I could breathe through it. The mediation session was scheduled for early February, 5 months after Arthur had slid that folder across the breakfast table. We sat on opposite sides of a conference table in a downtown Toronto office, each with our lawyers present. Arthur looked older than I remembered. His suit was the same expensive cut, but it hung differently, like he lost weight he hadn't meant to. Sylvia's report was placed on record. $162,000 in documented transfers to Harwood Capital. Consulting arrangements that his firm's investigation had found were not disclosed as required. An income he had reported to his lawyer as substantially lower than what the records indicated. Arthur's counsel tried twice to reframe the Harwood transactions as legitimate business activity. Christine dismantled both arguments with documents I had photographed in my own home office at 11 o'clock at night in my slippers. Mrs. Calloway, the mediator said at one point, looking at me over his reading glasses, do you understand the full scope of what's being proposed under the revised equalization? I said I did. And you're prepared to accept the terms as outlined? Christine touched my arm. We're reviewing, she said, what was being proposed once the hidden assets were properly included in the equalization calculation was substantially different from a worn-out Ford and 24 months of support. Ontario's family property law requires an equalization of net family property, what each spouse accumulated during the marriage. When Sylvia's documentation was accepted, Arthur's NFP was recalculated to include everything in Harwood. The numbers shifted dramatically. In the final agreement, I kept the house. Arthur would pay out my share of the equalization, including the transferred assets, over a structured period, or face a lien on any property he held or acquired. Spousal support was set at $4,200 a month for 8 years, indexed to inflation. Arthur was responsible for all of my legal fees, which by that point were considerable. He didn't fight it. I think by that point his own legal situation had consumed whatever fight was left in him. The OSC complaint had resulted in a formal investigation. His firm, which had completed its own internal review, had filed a civil claim against him for breach of fiduciary duty. He was no longer a financial advisor in any professional capacity. He would not be again. I signed the final papers on a Thursday afternoon in March. Christine shook my hand. Sylvia, whom I'd called on the way over, said, "Well done, Mrs. Calloway. You did the hard part." I drove home alone, stood in the front hall of my house, for a long moment, with my coat still on. Then I made a pot of tea. The months after the divorce were quieter than I expected. Not easy exactly. Grief doesn't care about winning. I had 40 years of habit. His coffee order, the particular way he cleared his throat before saying something he thought was important, the weight of another person in the house, and grief showed up for all of it, regardless of what he had done. I let myself feel it. I didn't try to talk myself out of it, but I also started doing things I hadn't done in years. I rejoined the community choir I'd left when life got busy 20 years ago. I took a watercolor class at the art center on Thursday evenings, and I was not particularly good at it, and I didn't care at all. My daughter started bringing the grandchildren over every second Sunday, and we cooked together, the 4 of us, and the kitchen filled up with noise in a way I hadn't realized I missed. My son came down from Ottawa every few months. We started walking long walks along the lake, talking about everything and nothing. He told me once, on one of those walks that he didn't know I was this funny. I was always this funny, I said. Dad talked a lot, he said, and that was the most either of us said about it. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I refinanced the house in my name alone and used a portion of the equalization proceeds to eliminate the remaining mortgage. The house was paid off. I own it outright. I'm 67 years old and I have no mortgage and a garden that needs attention every weekend and a choir rehearsal every Tuesday. And I sleep, genuinely sleep, every night. Arthur's situation continued to unfold slowly, the way these things do. The OSC investigation resulted in sanctions and a permanent ban from registering as an advisor in any capacity in Canada. The civil suit from his firm was settled. The terms weren't public, but my daughter heard from a mutual acquaintance that it was not a comfortable settlement for him. He lives in the furnished rental in Burlington, as far as I know. The support payments come every month, transferred automatically, and I have genuinely stopped thinking about where he is most of the time. What I think about instead is this. I spent almost 4 decades making sure another person's life ran smoothly. I remembered every appointment, managed every household account, carried the invisible weight of everything that needed doing so that he could focus on being professionally impressive. I don't regret any of it. That was my family. That was my life. Those were my children. But I let myself become invisible in the process, not to my children, to myself. The week after the mediation, before the final papers were signed, my daughter and I were having coffee, and she said something I think about still. "Mom, you should have been this woman the whole time." I looked at her. "Not because of Dad," she said. "I just mean, you're so clear. You know exactly what you think, and you go and do it, and you don't apologize for it. You've been like this whole time, and I feel like I only just met this version of you." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't, entirely. What I know is this. The Tuesday morning Arthur handed me that folder. He thought he was ending my life as I knew it, and in a way, he was right. He just had no idea what was coming next. If you're listening to this and you're in a marriage where you don't know the passwords, don't know the account names, don't know what your family's net worth actually is, please don't wait for a folder across a breakfast table. Know your finances, not because you don't trust your partner, because you owe that to yourself. Because knowing is not a threat to a healthy marriage, and in a marriage where things are not healthy, it might be the most important thing you have. I have roses to tend, a choir to sing with, 2 grandchildren who like to bake, and a paid-off house with good light in the mornings. I am more myself at 67 than I have been in decades, and I'm just getting started.